broadcast. Hello, everyone.
Ah, brilliant! At last.
At last, I think you're going all around. I've got two Zoom accounts, and that has caused me all end of problems.
Oh right, okay? You've got JPEG on there as well.
Who's the Secret Santa?
No, sir.
Oh, that's me.
Good morning, everybody. I'm really sorry about that. That was very, very stressful.
Quite all right, sir.
How lovely to see you all.
Lovely to see you too.
Hi, sir.
Hi, sir.
Who was that? Good morning, everybody. Hello. It's good morning and good afternoon to Boy. And I was hoping we'd get Seb in from
Hi, Nathan.
in the evening.
Hi.
Yeah. No sign of Seb, but everyone else, it's good morning and say Boy, good afternoon. Boy, you look very tropical where you are. Right, okay. How many have we got?
Angry.
Is everyone in all right? I can see people's names.
I see everybody. There we go. Now I can see everybody.
Yes.
Hi, Owen.
Hello, Owen. Hi,
Hi,
Owen.
Layla.
Right. Thank you, by the way, everybody who's managed to get essays to me so far. And I've got most of the socialism ones done. There's a couple still to go back on those, but I'll be on to those. Right, okay. I've got to be honest, the main purpose of this session is to check you're all still alive and that you're all doing all right. So, basically just to keep me going. Now, the first thing is a couple of housekeeping things, which is, of course, I assume you know this, but firstly, in fact, why would you know this? We will be writing reports on you on your lower sixth. They're due in June the 26th. So I've got to go by what you've got for me so far, and your the essays, etc., and your January exam. But of course, I won't have the normal summer exam to go on. Your summer exam is going to take place. It's going to be 2 weeks after you come back in September. Therefore, okay, we do need to keep noses to the grindstone and keep going. Now, in a way, this situation, bad though it is a godsend in terms of the work. It should mean we get through what I was hoping to get through very easily, because of course study leave won't apply. You'll be set work throughout what would have been study leave. I think where we would have been, I think you would have had 1 more week after this one, and then you're all tramping off to do your exams, and that of course is no longer taking place, and therefore that's time will be used to finish off all the stuff for paper 2, which means the UK constitutional stuff, Prime Minister, Cabinet, other institutions, and of course the judiciary, and of course then we can embark on the non-core ideology of your choice. Now, it might be quite a good idea to try that link that up to your EPQ. Now, I know in your EPQ, you're not supposed to study anything that also comes up in your actual A levels that you're doing. But with the non-core ideologies, I think that's a bit of a grey area, because you could easily choose an ideology that you're not studying in depth, because as your EPQ topic. Now, why that might be a good idea, because often people choose an ideology, then realise halfway through they're actually a bit more interested in a different one. And so quite a good idea would be to study, go through the textbook chapters. There's five of them, of course. Okay, go through, see which one grabs your fancy, and then choose a sort of second choice. And think if there might be an EPQ in it, because some people struggle a bit for EPQ topics. So to take an example, for instance, well, you could do, for instance, let's take the German Communist Party, for instance, and somebody might want to do an EPQ on something on the lines of why did the German Communist Party fail to stop Hitler? And that would bring in your work on Rosa Luxemburg quite nicely. Quite a few of you are historians. You could see how that topic, it would also key in quite nicely with the nationalism topic. And ideology, and that I think that's the kind of thing you would be able to do. Right, okay. Now, a lesson now. I'd say, thanks to me spending so much time, I'm not sure how much time I got, but anyway, I hope you've all looked at the homework task that I set. Oh, hang on. Sorry, 2 people waiting to be admitted. There we go. My apologies to Ali and Maddie. Ali and Maddie, sorry about that, keeping you waiting. Didn't notice you were there. My apologies. Right, I was just saying what's happening in terms of we've got, I have to write reports on you for June the 26th is the due date. And then you will have exams when you come back in September on what would have normally taken place in May. And therefore we do need to make sure all the work's done and so on. Right, now going to the work I've set this week. As you can see, I put a whole pile of textbook pages up, which should, of course, be unnecessary because I'm sure you've all got one of these. Has anyone not got one? Do I unmute? How do I? I'm not sure how I unmute you. Anyway. It's the first time I've ever hosted a meeting, so I don't know. I don't know how I can unmute you. But anyway, you've all got the textbook, okay? So you didn't really need that. I put it up just in case somebody hasn't got it. And the point is that it's just about going through that chapter in detail, going through the pre-tuned videos, making sure you've covered up the various areas. Now let's talk briefly about some of those. Let's start off with it starts off with individual ministerial responsibility. Now, what I would strongly urge you to do is to look carefully at what's going on at the very moment, because there are so many great examples happening right in front of your very eyes in terms of government. Okay, for instance, let's take Priti Patel. And this concept of individual ministerial responsibility. Now, she's got a little bit of let me say, a reputation in that she's been in charge in 3 different government departments, and in each seems to have left behind a sort of, trail of wreckage of the civil servants she's dealt with, and so on. And that's, she is. Where does the relationship between minister and civil servant start in the beginning? So a couple of points to mention. Individual ministerial responsibility. Remember, you're doing a theoretical subject. Politics is theoretical, okay? And the main theories here are democracy and accountability and scrutiny, right? The government, the executive of the United Kingdom should make itself open to scrutiny by Parliament, by the opposition, by the press and the media, okay, and at all points have to account for exact actions. And that means that, of course, the Prime Minister is the main person who does that, Prime Minister's questions, but all along the line, every minister in the cabinet also has to, 1, defend the government line, and 2, defend the record of their individual department. Now, you've seen some good examples of that during this coronavirus, in that different ministers have taken the daily briefings, okay, and often they've combined that, taking it with asking questions about their particular department and how it's been affected by the coronavirus, etc. Now, obviously, the normal scrutiny about Parliament's been suspended, and therefore, for instance, Prime Minister's questions last week, I don't know if any of you managed to see it, but Keir Starmer made his debut, and I have to say, rather shredded Dominic Raab. But the book is, it wasn't the normal, the normal exchange simply didn't take place, with all the cheering and the jeering and all the rest of it, which is all the fun of the fair when it comes to Prime Minister's question time. But you've seen other ministers. Now, should they, for instance, recently, Yvette Cooper a couple of weeks ago complained about Priti Patel not engaging with her select committee. Now, remember, the select committee is a bit of backbenchers. Okay, they shadow government departments. So the Home Affairs department that Yvette Cooper's in charge of should shadow the Home Department, Home Office Minister, and of course Home Secretary is Priti Patel, and she basically was refusing to meet it, even over Zoom. Okay, maybe she didn't know how to do it either, like me. But you've had some great examples here, and then make sure when you see things like that, they get into your notes, because obviously they're, for obvious reasons, not in the textbook. And if you can update the textbook, it's really good. As soon as you can bring in examples involving Boris Johnson and his Prime Minister, You just did something for me. Thank you very much for that. On Prime Minister power, Prime Ministerial style. Okay, how powerful is Prime Minister? Now, it's very, very early to make any sort of judgment about Boris Johnson as Prime Minister for obvious reasons. But you can already start making some judgments about his style and make some observations about what happened when he was in intensive care and the government got a bit flaky because, of course, it meant the other ministers had to step up to take his place. So that's again, look for current examples to be able to talk about in essays of that nature. Right. Okay. So where was I? Oh yeah, individual ministerial responsibility. The fact is they're responsible for their department. Now that in their department often comprises as many as 2,000 civil servants. Civil servants operate under anonymity. Individual civil servants are not meant to be known. Their role is to advise ministers and obviously to put their wishes into practice. They are the ones who actually do the work for to when the new laws are passed and so on to enforce them, etc. And they have to advise ministers. But in doing that, they are meant to be neutral. Okay, they because they are there for government after government. They're permanent. They are. They're not removed from one administrator to the next. If you go from one party to the other, if you went from a Conservative government to a Labour government, those civil servants don't get sacked as in America, where the president basically removes all the civil servants and replaces them with his own people. That does not happen, and instead they stay on, and the point is that it shouldn't make any difference who's in place. Now again, you've got some good examples recently under Brexit of whether or not civil servants are actually neutral and their relationship with their ministers. So, for instance, there were accusations that the civil service, almost to a man, were anti-Brexit, and so they wouldn't cooperate with the Brexit negotiations process and so on. So again, that's something which is too recent for the textbook, but really should be in there, I think. The two good examples in the textbook, I think, are Norman Lamont, if I remember rightly, on Black Wednesday, when the thing is, if there's a departmental failing, if something goes wrong, okay, it's the minister who should take the rap. It's the minister who should resign. Now, in 1992, there was Black Wednesday, and the British economy collapsed almost as spectacularly as it just has done now. And who should have resigned, perhaps, is the Chancellor, who was Norman Lamont at the time. But Lamont refused to, because he simply pointed out that all he was doing was following the government line, and therefore, if John Major hadn't resigned as Prime Minister, why should he as Chancellor? And so he refused. Another one is the other one in the textbook is Derek Lewis, when now who was the Home Secretary at the time? It was 1995, and there was a series of breakouts from Parkhurst Prison under Isle of Wight. There was not just one; I think it was 3 separate mass breakouts by prisoners, and obviously the Home Office Minister in charge of prisons should have resigned. I can't think who it was. It 190 something. It was Michael Howard as Home Secretary. Michael Howard refused to. Instead, he sacked the civil servants in charge of prisons, and a chap called Derek Lewis. And so Michael Howard here, as minister, is saying it wasn't me. It was that civil servant over there. He's responsible. Now, that, strictly speaking, should not take place. And indeed, it's very interesting if it says in the textbook that Derek Lewis then sued the government for wrongful dismissal and won. And therefore, okay, that really shows the fact was that an individual civil servant, if a civil servant cocks up, let's face it, they're going to, then what they should be removed by the internal processes of the civil service and not sacked very prominently in the media. That's why the Priti Patel bullying thing recently was made news and headlines, because here were individual civil servants being named and shamed, so to speak, and retaliating by launching lawsuits. In fact, it's ongoing. So watch this space with Priti Patel. She's being sued, or rather the government are being sued. I'm not sure actually who's being sued, but I think it might be Priti Patel herself for bullying this civil servant out of a job. And anyway, that's an ongoing legal case, and it's something that you need to know about, and it should be in your notes. Right, next one. The other doctrine which you need to look at is collective ministerial responsibility, okay, collective cabinet responsibility, I should say. So not only are individual ministers responsible for running the departments, but the whole lot of them are responsible for following a government line. There's an agreed line. The whole point about cabinet meetings is that's when an agreed government position is reached, and that must be defended. And if you can't defend that position because you don't agree with it, and you don't agree with it to the point that you feel that you can't morally continue in office and defend something that you don't believe in, then you've got to resign. Key examples here: 1986, Michael Heseltine walked out the cabinet over what was called the Westland affair. There was a big Westland made helicopters, actually in Weston-super-Mare, where I went to school. But there was a takeover. There were two companies involved in the takeover. If you remember rightly, one was French and one was American. And Michael Heseltine, the minister involved, favoured the French bid. But it became obvious to him that Margaret Thatcher very strongly favoured the American company bid, okay, and he was basically trying to block Heseltine in every way, and so Heseltine had enough and he walked out. Another one is Robin Cook after the invasion of Iraq in 2003, when he realised he didn't support the invasion, and eventually said, I can't stay in a cabinet and defend the invasion of Iraq when I simply don't believe it was the correct thing to do. Okay, so again, have those examples in your notes. One point to make about collective cabinet responsibility is it's a very good way of shutting people up. A good example was about 3 years ago. And the backbench Tory MP, as he was then, Robert Halfon, you've probably come across him, he's disabled. But anyway, he was running a very, very effective campaign from the backbenches to end NHS hospital car parking charges. And he was basically got all party support. He raised a petition with MPs from all parties signing, and he'd got 250 odd MPs to sign this petition to end car parking charges. And George Osborne, the Treasurer, the Chancellor, who realised that this would be, if this was done, this would actually knock a big hole in the NHS finances because the money from the parking helps pay for the NHS, obviously. And so Osborne moved in to shut Halfon up. Now, of course, he could have been sort of threatening him and so on, but instead he did it in a much better way, promote him. He actually made Robert Halfon his own personal, permanent private secretary, who's the PPS, who is the, if you like, personal secretary to an MP. And it's actually a government point. It's the lowest rung on the government ladder, which means you're going to be paid as a government minister. And of course, immediately that happened, then Robert Halfon's now a member of the government. And as a member of the government, he has to follow the government line, which was that car parking charges stay. And of course, he could have refused to take the promotion, and he could have stayed as a backbench MP and continued to campaign, but he didn't. Halfon decided to take the silver, so to speak, and took the post. And as soon as he did that, his campaign, well, he could no longer lead it. His campaign continued, but his other people was going to have to follow it through, and he was no longer able to be associated with it, and I have to say it rather lost momentum. So there's a good example there of how bringing people into the cabinet immediately changes. They're forced to defend a government line. Interesting examples here is what happened under the coalition, because if you remember, what happened was in 2010 a coalition agreement was drawn up between, sorry, just look at the time, I don't know how much time we've got left, about 10 minutes, 5, I'm not sure. I'll just talk to the end anyway. A coalition agreement was drawn up, and all Liberal Democrat and Tory ministers had to support that agreement. And now that was a much more difficult thing to do, because clearly that meant that Tory supporting Liberal Democrat causes and vice versa, which meant people often supporting things they simply didn't believe in. And certainly that was very difficult for some of the Liberal Democrats, I think, supporting aspects of the austerity economic policies. Now, it so happened that Nick Clegg, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, actually basically agreed with them. he's not orange booker, and believes in the small states and so on. But some of the others, I think Vince Cable, for instance, who was very much a social democrat from the modern liberal side of the end of the party, the social democrat end of the Liberal Party, he found that very, very difficult to do. Now then, right, I'm going to stop for the moment because otherwise I'll just witter on and lose the whole time. Now, has anyone got any issues or anything, any points or observations they would like to raise with me while I've got you all here? Anyone?
With the Boris Johnson thing, could they ask about Boris Johnson in a question with the whole cabinet thing, or would it be up to us to mention it in an essay?
No, it'll be up to you to mention it. The question will always be broadly about how successful, what makes for a successful prime minister, for instance, what makes a prime minister powerful. And it's just think in terms of your paragraphs. You'd want paragraphs about different prime ministers. But now, can I remind you all, by the way, when you compare, try to compare within a paragraph if you can. A feature of some people's ideologies essays was you tend to have a whole paragraph about, say, the revolutionary socialists, then move on to the next paragraph about the revisionists. And it's far better to say within a paragraph, the revolutionary socialists say this about this, but the revisionists say that. That scores much higher on the assessment scores. And it's the same when you're assessing prime ministers. Try to do, if you're taking a particular aspect of, for instance, how they run their cabinet, for instance, and you're comparing Margaret Thatcher with her quite autocratic style, Tony Blair with his sofa government whereby decisions were not really taken at cabinet level, with John Major's cabinet of the chums, as it's called, where he was a very collegiate style. He liked long cabinet meetings where important decisions were taken there by consensus and everyone having a chance to say. So you'd make that point within a paragraph if you can. Okay, thank you for that, Amar. Anyone else?
Also, how much do you need to know about private member bills, government bills, and stuff like that? Like, because I know you said that powers of the Commons and Lords is important, but do you need to know much about the
You might be asked
bill
about well,
process?
I'd like the question to be something along the lines of how effectively does it carry out, does Parliament stroke the House of Commons stroke the House of Lords carry out the legislative function? Now, I don't think you'd be asked about the House of Lords and its legislative function alone, but you could be asked about the Commons and its legislative function, in which case you do have to talk about private members' bills, because the point being that they're very, very rarely successful and they're very easily blocked, and they only are really successful if the government itself takes them on board and it becomes effectively a government programme. So, for instance, the Abortion Act of 1967. No. Run out of time. We've removed the 40-minute time on the group meeting. I'll carry on for a few minutes then before I bore you all to death. But anyway, that was very nice of them. Yeah, so the Abortion Act really passed because it had, although the Labour government of the time didn't say so, it did have the support of the vast majority of the cabinet, and therefore, although it wasn't ever a government bill, it was in effect. And so private members' bills only succeed if they got that. And the vast majority of private members' bills are talked out, or they pass only because they're trivial or entirely local in their focus. It's very rare that really big national issues are ever passed by private members' bill, and it simply won't pass. Make sure you got Christopher Chope, by the way, in there, and the way he doesn't believe that private members' bills should even happen, and so he just objects to them all and bashes them all down. Remember, the upskirting bill was the one he notoriously removed to massive outrage, but you could see why Chope did that. Okay, well, we have a chat. Well, James Scott saying over. Yep, we were all
nearly. But another question was, you know, that with the prime ministers, do we need to sort of have? Because obviously we've talked about like you mentioned about the roles of the different prime ministers. How we did with elections, so how we had like 3 different elections from different time periods. Do you think we should do that with prime ministers as well?
Yes. Okay. Yes, be prepared.
Would there be any you recommend?
Well, the obvious ones are Thatcher, Major, Blair, but you know, they're all the prime ministers we've had recently have been significant, haven't they? I mean, Cameron and May, and Johnson is already we only had him for 4 months, and he's already a tremendously significant prime minister in terms of his being somebody presented first thing on his inbox is a pandemic in which he is himself seriously ill. That's a pretty major thing for any prime minister to have to deal with, and so this whole thing has revealed some things about Boris Johnson's style, and also things about the way the government operates, or maybe doesn't operate particularly well when there's some sort of crisis to deal with. Right. Anyone who's not Amar got a question?
My question was just the Derek Lewis when he was fired over the prisons. What year was that in?
1995. It's in the text, boy. If you text page 191, I think 192.
Page 192.
That's
Okay.
that whole section is something like that. I should know. I put the whole. I photographed the whole, more or less the whole book, so to put it up. Does anyone actually use those JPEG images, by the way, or are they just a pain?
I've used them.
Lovely, because you could say, I mean, it should have their textbook itself, but it sometimes quite useful to have the pages to refer to. Right, anyone else got questions? How are we doing with the essays, by the way? The vast majority got essays in. One or two of you I'm expecting essays to land in my inbox any minute. So thanks in advance to those people. I think you know who you are. And I know some of you are still expecting your essays back from me. And they will be with you very shortly, I assure you. Okay. Oh, Seb, must be close to midnight for you. Oh, yeah. Glad you managed to join us. Yeah.
Good day.
What's it like out in Australia at the moment, weather-wise?
Oh, it's okay. It's getting colder, but at the moment it's okay. Still summerish. If I run the quarantine, so.
I have to say, it's quite amazing technology that you can talk to someone 10,000 miles away like this. I think it's quite amazing. Right. Okay. I think that's about it for now, really. I mean, please keep plugging on with these notes and so on. And of course, keep well and safe, and look after your families. And keep close track on the news and what's going on, and look for examples to add to your notes and so on. Now, what I'll be setting you next. So the next topic coming up, take textbook down to remind myself where we are. Yeah, we've just got to Theresa May. Yeah, relations between branches. There we go. So if you look at page 214, relations between branches, that's what's coming up next. Now, weirdly, the EU is still in that, and it's still part of the marks of the exam. Now, I find it very difficult to imagine that they will actually ask the EU anything to do with the EU in exams, given that all the structures, anything that, for instance, membership of the various EU institutions, European law, the European Court of Justice no longer has jurisdiction in the UK. Those things, for instance, I can't see really what we could ask about them. But in this section is the judiciary and the Supreme Court, and that is important, and that is very likely to get asked. So anyway, that's what we're going to be going on to next. That's what I'd like to look at. Anyway, getting back to the work I've set this week, please go through, make detailed notes. Please use Pretude. And can I remind you about Politics Review online as well, the magazines and the extras bits as well. Please have a look at those, and there are some quite useful things in there. Right, okay. And I'm going to call that a day. Okay, thank you so much for attending. Sorry about the 10-minut delay. Well, I tell you, I was in a state of blind panic because my problem is I got two Zoom IDs. You see, one based on my adamsgs.uk email address, and one based on my own donaldfear.sky@sky.com email address. And I was logged in as the wrong one. I hadn't realised. I was thinking, why can't I find this meeting? And I suddenly realised what happened, so I had to log out and log back in again. But that seemed to take forever, and I had a long time looking at the blue circle. Yes, we got Amma. Oh, hello. Owen, what's the matter?
So
Talk if you want me to talk.
Owen.
No, this is my turn. So do you think in time we'll have like normal school days with Skype or like Zoom lessons, or is it just going to stick to one a week?
I'm quite happy to do as many as you like, to be quite honest. I think I'd like to draw the line at 5, but obviously this is very much a tipping the toe in the water. This first online lesson I've ever given, and I'm not sure how well it worked. It's quite weird, just because I'm talking and not, of course, getting any feedback while I'm talking, and that's a bit weird. As I'm normally glaring at Amar to get him to shut up and being interrupted all the time, and so
I had to mute myself to sort of like.
I found it a bit spooky, to be quite honest. But yeah, I would like to give all these lessons. I think it's quite good. I mean, how have you found it? Have you found it at all useful, and or was this a total waste of your time?
Yeah,
Layla, what do you reckon?
Very good.
Let's hear Layla.
Pretty good, yeah. It's
You've
just,
got something out of it. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
gotten a whole page of notes out of it, so it's been good.
Fantastic. Yeah, we put those together with the textbook to obviously to make sure they're accurate and correct. Anyone else? Alex Maidens, how have you found it?
I thought it was really good. I got loads of examples down that I hadn't thought of before that aren't in the textbook. So
Yeah, I guess most of it is in the textbook, but try to get the ones that aren't in the textbook because they're too new. That's the point.
No one said we were making notes.
Yeah,
I didn't know we were making notes.
you don't have to, but it would be useful for next time. But
That's a good point.
it certainly, I think you should certainly have the textbook in front of you with the right pages and so on. George, have you got anything out of it?
It's very good, sir. Thank you.
Yes. And boy, I have to say, I'm very envious of your weather because it's wet and rainy here, whereas it looks very sunny there.
It's pretty good, yeah.
Of course, you lot in Germany, your lockdown's ending and you're all going back to normal, aren't you?
Oh, well, not normal. Schools are opening next week, but it's still lockdown. You're not actually allowed to go outside.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And it looks like you live in a sort of mansion with an enormous garden, so it doesn't make a difference to you. Okay. John, how have you found it? Lovely hair colour, by the way. Is that new? He's still muted. Anyone else to talk? Okay. Scarlett, thank you very much for your email, by the way. That was most appreciated. Thank you. And the essay looks great as well. Okay. Have you found it a useful session?
Yeah, I have. It was very informative.
Right, lovely. Right, I'm going to end the meeting now, and I'll arrange another one. Since it seems to have got a pretty positive response, I'll try to arrange another one next week. But then I'll try to up them to a couple a week and see how we go. Okay.
So I'd say for your first lesson, it was really good. So I'd say round.
Bye, everybody, and keep safe and well.
Bye, sir.
Bye.